You have
Margaret Chen had
always
been a
been so
decorated
jealous of
emergency
me.
room surgeon who'd saved countless lives over her
How
40-year
could you
career.
say
At
that?
68, she should have been enjoying peaceful retirement in her daughter Victoria's Mediterranean-style estate, where she occupied a guest wing that felt increasingly like a gilded cage. What the elegantly dressed women at Victoria's charity luncheon didn't know was that the frail, confused old woman struggling to butter her bread had been systematically poisoned for 8 months. The Waterford crystal caught the afternoon light as Margaret's trembling hand reached for her water glass. Her daughter's eyes flashed a warning across the polished dining table, her smile never faltering for the benefit of their 12 guests. "I'm quite thirsty," Margaret murmured, her words slightly slurred. The room fell silent as Victoria rose gracefully, wine glass in hand, and walked to her mother's chair with measured steps. The wine hit Margaret's face with calculated precision, not a single drop staining the cream tablecloth, yet every inch of her skin was drenched. Her silver hair, carefully styled that morning with shaking hands, now hung in wet strands against her cheeks. "You're embarrassing yourself again," Victoria whispered, just loud enough for Margaret to hear. Margaret sat motionless as 12 faces stared, their expressions a mixture of shock and fascination at this unexpected drama. Victoria's husband, David, placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. "She's been declining rapidly," he announced to the room, his voice heavy with false concern. "The doctors say it's progressing faster than expected." Margaret's fingers finally moved to her face, wiping away the wine with hands that seemed foreign to her, thin where they had once been strong enough to perform surgery for 18 hours straight. "I apologize," she said quietly, rising unsteadily. "Please excuse me." Behind her, Victoria's voice carried clearly. "I told David we should have placed her in memory care months ago." In her room, Margaret sat before the vanity mirror, studying the gaunt face that stared back. When had she become this hollow-eyed stranger? She reached for a tissue, noticing the tremor that had become constant over the past months. The shaking had started around the same time as the memory lapses, the dizziness, the fog that seemed to cloud her thoughts. Just normal aging, Dr. Patterson had assured her. Nothing concerning for someone your age. Outside her door, she heard footsteps pause, then continue down the hallway toward the master suite at the opposite end of the wing. She changed out of her wine-soaked blouse with painful slowness, each button a frustrating challenge for fingers that no longer obeyed her commands. After her husband James died 14 years ago, she had managed alone for over a decade before Victoria insisted she move in. "It makes no sense for you to live alone at your age, Mother," Victoria had said, her voice dripping with concern. The kindness had seemed genuine then. Margaret woke disoriented the next morning, taking several long moments to remember where she was. "You're in Victoria's house," she whispered to herself. "You've lived here for 2 years. It's Tuesday, September 12th. The clock read 7:30. Beside it sat her pill organizer, a large plastic container with compartments for each day, subdivided into morning, noon, evening, and night. David filled it every Sunday evening, calling it her wellness regimen. Margaret reached for Tuesday's morning section, but her elbow knocked the organizer to the floor. Pills scattered across the hardwood like confetti. "No, no, no," she muttered, lowering herself carefully to her knees. The room tilted alarmingly. White capsules, blue tablets, small yellow pills. She gathered them slowly, counting 9 altogether. 9 pills every morning. Downstairs, the front door closed. Victoria leaving for her Pilates class. David would be at his law office until evening. The housekeeper, Carmen, would arrive at 9. Margaret placed the pills on her nightstand and made her way to the bathroom. Under the hot shower, she tried to wash away yesterday's humiliation, the wine dripping down her face, the pitying stares, Victoria's cold whisper. After dressing in one of the loose outfits that now comprised her entire wardrobe, Margaret returned to stare at the scattered pills. She picked up one of the white capsules, examining the tiny markings on its surface. Something felt wrong. These didn't resemble any supplement she recognized from her medical training. The blue tablet looked familiar, triggering a flash of memory. Victoria's bathroom cabinet, open. Margaret searching for aspirin months ago. Prescription bottle with David's name. Lorazepam 2 milligrams. Margaret's heart began racing despite the fog in her mind. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine used for anxiety and insomnia. In geriatric patients, sometimes used as a chemical restraint to manage difficult behaviors. She knew this drug intimately, had prescribed it thousands of times, had also seen it abused in elder care facilities. She examined each pill with a physician's trained eye. The yellow one resembled donepezil, an Alzheimer's medication that caused severe confusion if given to someone without the disease. The larger white tablet looked like haloperidol, an antipsychotic used to sedate agitated dementia patients. "Oh my God," she breathed. The bathroom seemed miles away as she stumbled toward it, gripping the sink for support. Her own daughter and son-in-law were systematically drugging her into a state of dependence and confusion. But why? Fragments of overheard conversations surfaced in her mind. Victoria's voice, urgent and low. "The lawyer said we need at least 6 more months of documentation." David's response. "She's already declining visibly. The competency evaluation should be straightforward by January." Most damning of all. Once the conservatorship is established, everything transfers automatically. Margaret's hands stopped trembling. For the first time in months, her mind felt sharp, honed by fear and rage. They wanted her declared incompetent. They wanted control of her assets, which included not just her pension and the house she'd signed over when she moved in, but also the substantial settlement from the medical malpractice lawsuit. The hospital's insurance company had paid $4.7 million 6 months ago to settle claims that inadequate staffing had contributed to patient deaths. Margaret had been named in the suit as head of the emergency department, though she'd fought against the budget cuts that caused the staffing crisis. The settlement money, held in trust, would pass to Victoria only if Margaret died or was declared mentally incompetent. Margaret flushed the toilet and rinsed her mouth. She found an old evening clutch in her closet, a beaded purse she hadn't used in years, emptied its contents, placed the pills inside, and hid it behind winter coats at the back of the closet. Then she filled a glass with water and returned to her nightstand. She needed to think, to plan. But first, she needed them to believe nothing had changed. When Carmen knocked at 9 with a breakfast tray, Margaret was sitting in her armchair by the window, staring vacantly at the garden below. The empty pill organizer sat prominently on her nightstand. "Good morning, Dr. Chun," Carmen said. "How are you feeling today?" Margaret turned slowly, maintaining the confused expression she'd worn for months without realizing it. "Carmen, is it morning already?" "Yes, almost 9. I brought your oatmeal and tea." "Thank you, dear." Carmen moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Dr. Chun, did you take your morning medications? Mrs. Victoria is very particular about your schedule." "Yes, I think so. The container is empty." Carmen seemed relieved. "Good, that's very good." She left, closing the door softly. Margaret abandoned her vacant expression immediately. She didn't touch the tea, who knew what might be in it, but ate some of the plain oatmeal to quiet her stomach. Her mind, suddenly clear after months of fog, raced through possibilities. For the next 4 days, Margaret performed the role of her drugged self with meticulous precision. She shuffled when she walked, slurred her words slightly, affected confusion whenever Victoria or David was present. Privately, she collected each day's pills in the beaded clutch, drank only bottled water she opened herself, ate sparingly of anything Victoria or David prepared, and began documenting everything in a small notebook she found in a desk drawer. She also began listening more carefully to their conversations, positioning herself near air vents where sound carried, lingering outside doors when she heard their voices. On the 5th night, she heard them in David's home office. "This is taking too long," Victoria was saying. "Dr. Patterson said he won't sign the competency evaluation until there's more documented decline." "We're being cautious," David replied. "If we push too hard, someone might notice." "Who?" "She has no friends left." "You've made sure of that?" "The housekeeper?" "Carmen needs this job to support her family in Honduras. She won't risk asking questions." "What about Mom's former colleagues at the hospital?" "They haven't called in months. As far as they know, she's enjoying retirement." Besides, Victoria's voice took on a cruel edge. I doubled her morning dose yesterday. You saw her at lunch, barely able to hold a spoon. Margaret's blood turned to ice. There was something personal in Victoria's determination, a vindictiveness that went beyond simple greed. We need that money, David, Victoria continued. The investors aren't going to wait forever. $2 million doesn't just appear. I'm aware, David snapped. You're the one who convinced me to put our savings into your brother's cryptocurrency scheme. That wasn't my fault. Richard assured us it was a guaranteed return. Well, Richard's in federal prison now, and we're facing bankruptcy unless we get access to your mother's settlement. Bankruptcy and fraud charges. David's voice was bitter. If the Bar Association finds out I misappropriated client funds trying to cover our losses, I'll be disbarred. Then we'd better make sure they don't find out. Which means we need Mom's money by January at the latest. Margaret eased away from the vent and back to her room, moving silently in stocking feet. She closed her door without sound and leaned against it, processing what she'd learned. The next morning, Margaret decided to test Carmen. When the housekeeper brought breakfast, Margaret was sitting fully dressed at her desk, her hair neatly combed, writing in her notebook. Carmen's surprise was obvious. Dr. Chen, you're up and dressed so early. I slept well. My mind feels clearer today. That's wonderful, Carmen said, but worry flickered in her eyes. Would you like breakfast downstairs? The morning room has lovely light. I'd like that very much. Downstairs, Margaret sat at the breakfast table where Victoria had humiliated her 5 days earlier. Carmen brought fresh coffee, toast, and sliced fruit. Mrs. Victoria left early for a tennis match, Carmen explained. She won't be back until afternoon. Margaret nodded. Carmen, how long have you worked for my daughter? Almost 3 years, Dr. Chen. In that time, have you noticed changes in me? In my health, my mental state? Carmen hesitated, glancing toward the door. Please, Margaret said, reaching out to touch Carmen's hand. I need to know the truth. You've been different, Carmen admitted quietly, like a shadow of yourself these past months. But lately, the last few days, you seem more like the lady who used to tell me stories about saving lives in the emergency room. When did you first notice the change? When did I start seeming like a shadow? Last winter, February, maybe. You were so sharp before, always reading medical journals, talking about your cases. Then suddenly you were sleeping constantly, confused when you woke up, forgetting conversations we'd had that morning. February. Just after the settlement money had been finalized. Thank you, Carmen. One more question, and please, I won't put your job at risk. Have you ever seen anyone putting anything in my food or drink? Carmen's eyes filled with tears. Dr. Chen, I need this job. My daughter has medical bills. I understand, Margaret said gently. I won't put you in danger. But if you've seen something, I need to know. Mrs. Victoria, Carmen whispered. In your morning tea, pills crushed into powder. I saw her several times when Mr. David was away. She told me it was prescribed medicine you forget to take. Did she ask you to do it? No, never. She always prepared your tea herself. Thank you, Carmen. You've helped me more than you know. That afternoon, while Victoria was still out, Margaret made her way to the master bathroom under the pretense of borrowing face cream. Instead, she quickly photographed the medicine cabinet with her phone, a gift from Victoria before the drugging began, when Margaret had still been a person to her daughter. Back in her room, she examined the photos. The labels confirmed her suspicions. Lorazepam prescribed to David, haloperidol with the patient name torn off, donepezil with no label at all, and several other medications she didn't immediately recognize. She needed professional analysis. She needed someone with no connection to Victoria. She needed to get out of the house. 3 days later, Margaret told Victoria she had an appointment. My dermatologist, Dr. Yamamoto, remember? I scheduled it weeks ago. Victoria looked suspicious. You haven't mentioned any appointment, Mother. I wrote it down, Margaret said, showing a notation in her planner that she'd added that morning. I still manage some things on my own. Perhaps I should drive you. I wouldn't want you getting lost. I'll take a rideshare, Margaret replied. I'm not completely helpless. She allowed her hand to tremble slightly as she adjusted her scarf, reminding Victoria of her supposedly deteriorating condition. All right, Victoria said reluctantly. But call me when you're finished. I'll pick you up. It was a small victory. Margaret called the rideshare herself and directed the driver not to Dr. Yamamoto's office, but to an address across town, the private practice of Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a toxicologist she'd known professionally for 30 years. Elena's surprise was evident when her assistant showed Margaret into the consultation room. Margaret-chin, I haven't seen you in years. I need your help, Elena. I believe I'm being systematically drugged by my daughter and her husband. Elena's professional demeanor engaged immediately. She closed the door, sat down across from Margaret, and listened without interruption as Margaret detailed her suspicions and the evidence she'd gathered. I'll need to run comprehensive tests, Elena said. Blood work, hair analysis for long-term exposure, and analysis of the pills you've collected. The hair sample will show what's been in your system over the past 6 to 8 months. How long for results? I can rush it. 72 hours for preliminary findings. I don't have much time. They're pushing for a competency evaluation. Once I'm declared incompetent, I lose everything. My autonomy, my assets, my voice. What you're describing, Margaret, if it's true, it's criminal elder abuse, assault, possibly attempted murder depending on the dosages and combinations. I know. That's why I need irrefutable evidence. And when you have it, what then? I haven't worked that out yet, but I need options. I'll help you, Elena said, but you need to be extremely careful. If they suspect you're collecting evidence, they might escalate. I understand, Margaret assured her. I've spent 40 years reading people under stress. I know how to play the role they expect. After providing samples and answering Elena's detailed questions about her symptoms, Margaret called Victoria. I'm finished with Dr. Yamamoto. Such a relief to have that mole checked. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, her expression tight with suspicion as she examined Margaret's face. I don't see any bandage. It was benign. He just looked at it. Next time I'll drive you, Victoria said, to be safe. Perhaps you're right, dear, Margaret replied mildly. That evening at dinner, David commented. I hear you went to an appointment today, Margaret. All by yourself. Yes, though I got confused about the address at first. Margaret laughed self-deprecatingly. Gave the driver the wrong street number. Poor man was very patient. Perhaps we should handle your medical appointments from now on, Victoria suggested. For safety. That might be best, Margaret agreed. In her room that night, she added to her journal. September 19th. Victoria and David concerned about my independent outing. Will likely restrict movements further. Dr. Rodriguez running tests. Results in 72 hours. Must maintain the performance until then. The next morning, Victoria brought Margaret's breakfast tray herself. Unusual since this was normally Carmen's task. I made you something special, Victoria said, setting down a cup of hot chocolate. I know how you love it. How thoughtful, Margaret said, lifting the cup and pretending to sip. Delicious. Drink it while it's hot. I added extra cinnamon the way you like it. I will, thank you. Victoria and I were thinking, Victoria continued. Since you're having trouble with appointments, perhaps we should have Dr. Patterson come here for a home visit. Tomorrow, actually. Just a routine checkup. Tomorrow. Too soon. Elena's results wouldn't be ready. I just saw Dr. Patterson last month. Margaret protested weakly. This is different. A more comprehensive evaluation, Victoria smiled. For your own good. After Victoria left, Margaret stared at the hot chocolate. She dipped her finger in it and touched it to her tongue. Beneath the sweetness was an unmistakable bitter chemical tang. They were increasing the dosage, preparing her for the evaluation. She poured the chocolate into her potted plant, wiped the cup to appear empty, and reached for her phone. Elena answered immediately. They've scheduled a competency evaluation for tomorrow, Margaret said. I can't wait for full results. Too soon for complete analysis, Elena replied. But preliminary findings confirm the presence of benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and anticholinergics in your system at dangerous levels. This is deliberate incapacitation, Margaret. I need to leave today, Margaret said. Can you help me disappear for a few days? My sister has a guest house. Small but private. No one would think to look for you there. Perfect. Can you send a car at 2? Carmen leaves at 1, and Victoria has a standing appointment with her personal trainer on Wednesdays. I'll arrange it. Margaret moved quickly after hanging up. She packed a small bag with essentials, actual medications for her controlled hypertension, a change of clothes, her journal and evidence, and hid the bag under her bed. Then she went downstairs to find Carmen. The housekeeper was folding laundry in the utility room. She startled when Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Chun, do you need something?" "Carmen, I'm going to ask something that might put your job at risk. But I promise if you help me, I'll make sure you're protected." Carmen's eyes widened. "What do you need?" At precisely 2 o'clock, a Navy sedan pulled into the circular driveway. The driver, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, approached the door confidently. She rang the bell. Carmen answered moments later. "Yes? Rideshare for Dr. Margaret Chen," the driver said, using the script Margaret had provided. "There must be a mistake. Dr. Chen didn't order a car. It's right here in my app. Dr. Margaret Chen, this address." The driver showed her phone screen. "One moment." Carmen closed the door and walked loudly toward the kitchen, then slipped upstairs where Margaret waited by her bedroom door, bag in hand. "She's here," Carmen whispered. "Remember what I told you. Wait 3 hours. Then call this number and tell them exactly what I wrote. Nothing more. Be careful, Dr. Chen. You too. And thank you for everything." Margaret followed Carmen downstairs and through the kitchen to the back door. The sedan was waiting in the alley behind the property, engine running. As Margaret settled into the passenger seat, the driver, Elena's sister Patricia, handed her a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses. "Just in case," she said. Elena mentioned this was sensitive. "Thank you." 25 minutes later, they arrived at a small property on the edge of town. A craftsman-style main house sat near the street, while a cottage nestled at the back of the lot, surrounded by mature trees that provided privacy. "It's modest," Patricia said as she showed Margaret inside. "But it's secure and comfortable. Everything you'll need." Patricia handed Margaret a key. "I'm in the main house if you need anything, but I'll respect your privacy. Elena will be by later with your test results." After Patricia left, Margaret sank onto the small sofa, suddenly overwhelmed. For the first time in months, she was truly alone, free from Victoria's watchful eyes, David's calculating gaze, Carmen caught in the middle. She allowed herself 5 minutes to feel it all. The fear, the rage, the profound sadness that her only child could betray her so completely. Then, with the practiced discipline of a career surgeon, she compartmentalized those emotions and focused on survival. Margaret spread her evidence across the cottage's small dining table. Her symptom journal, photographs of prescription bottles, the beaded clutch containing collected pills, her phone with timestamps of overheard conversations, and a thumb drive with copies of financial documents she'd managed to scan before the fog had descended. Her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Victoria called me," Carmen's frightened voice said. "She knows you're gone. I told her you were confused this morning, wandering in the garden, that I thought you'd gone to your room to rest. But she went to check and you weren't there." "What did she say?" "She's calling the police, reporting you missing. She told them you've been having episodes, that you're confused and might have wandered off." "Were the police there? Did you speak with them?" "Yes. I said what you told me to, that you seemed disoriented after breakfast and I assumed you were resting in your room." "Good," Margaret said. "Carmen, you've been incredibly brave, but I need you to do one more thing. Then you should distance yourself from this situation." "What is it?" "Keep your eyes open tomorrow. Listen to what they say when they think you're not paying attention. If you can safely get photos of any documents in David's office, medical records with my name, financial papers, anything like that, it would help. But only if it's safe." "I'll try," Carmen promised. "Dr. Chun, please be careful. They're very angry, especially Mrs. Victoria." After Carmen hung up, Margaret paced the small cottage. The police involvement complicated everything. She could come forward now, explain that she'd left voluntarily because she'd discovered Victoria and David were drugging her. But without complete evidence, it would be her word against theirs. And they'd spent months establishing her as confused and unreliable. No, she needed more. She picked up her phone again and dialed a number from memory. Ruth Kowalski answered, her voice brisk and professional. Margaret Chin. My God, it's been years. Ruth, I need your help. Ruth had been a colleague at the hospital, a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases. After retiring from the hospital, she joined the county prosecutor's office as a civilian consultant. I'm listening, Ruth said. I believe I'm the victim of elder abuse. Chemical restraint, fraudulent medical documentation, conspiracy to have me declared incompetent for financial gain. Tell me everything. For the next 20 minutes, Margaret detailed her situation. The systematic drugging, Victoria and David's plot to access her settlement money, the upcoming competency evaluation she'd fled. You have evidence? Ruth asked. Some. Toxicology tests in progress, witness testimony from the housekeeper, my own documentation. But I need more. You need legal protection, Ruth said. And you need it fast. What you're describing is criminal, Margaret. Multiple felony charges. I know. But Ruth, there's something else. I need to understand why Victoria is doing this. Is it just the money? Greed explains David's involvement. His career is on the line, he's facing disbarment. But Victoria's cruelty feels personal. You always were perceptive, Ruth said. All right, I'll make some discreet inquiries. See what I can find out about their situation. Where are you now? Somewhere safe. Friends are helping me. Good. Stay there. I'll call you tomorrow. Margaret tried to eat the soup Patricia had left for her, but her appetite had vanished. She went to bed early, hoping for rest, but her dreams were troubled. Fragmented images of Victoria as a child, as a teenager, as the cold woman she'd become. Morning brought little rest but renewed determination. Margaret showered, dressed, and made herself breakfast. As she drank her coffee, real coffee untainted by crushed medications, her phone rang. It's Ruth. I've been digging into your daughter's background, and Margaret, it's worse than you thought. What did you find? Victoria's in serious trouble. The charity foundation she runs, the one for underprivileged children, it's under investigation for fraud. The state attorney general suspects she's been embezzling donations for years. How much? Potentially millions. They're building a case, but it takes time to untangle nonprofit finances. So she's desperate, needs money from multiple sources. Exactly. And here's where it gets darker. 6 months ago, she updated your will without your knowledge. How is that possible? She has power of attorney for healthcare granted years ago when you had that surgery. She used it to get access to your estate attorney, claimed you wanted to make changes but were too confused to come in yourself. The attorney should have insisted on seeing me. He should have. He's also under investigation now. The updated will leaves everything to Victoria immediately upon your death or incompetency declaration, bypassing the usual probate process. They weren't just drugging me to control my assets. They were setting the stage for something worse. The medication combination you described, it could cause stroke or cardiac arrest in someone your age. Medical examiners might attribute it to natural causes, especially with a history of documented decline. They were planning to kill me. I believe you got out just in time. Ruth's voice was grave. But now we need to move fast. I want to bring in the prosecutor's office. With what we have, plus what my contacts have uncovered, we can make a case for attempted murder, not just elder abuse. Wait, Margaret said. There's something else I need to understand first. What? I'm not sure yet. Something about Victoria's motivations. Feels like there's more to this story. Give me until tomorrow evening. Then we'll go to the authorities together. All right, Ruth said. But Margaret, be extremely careful. Your daughter has shown she's willing to go to extraordinary lengths. After hanging up, Margaret stared out the cottage window, thinking. Victoria's cruelty felt personal, vindictive in a way that went beyond financial desperation. There was something she was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would explain not just what Victoria was doing, but why. Her phone rang again. Carmen, her voice barely a whisper. They're organizing a search party. Mrs. Victoria is on the news, crying, begging for information about your whereabouts. She's claiming you have dementia and might be in danger. Are the police taking it seriously? Very seriously. They have search dogs, volunteers, helicopters. And Dr. Chun, I found something in Mr. David's office. Medical records, but they're fake. treatments you never received, test results that were fabricated, all signed by Dr. Patterson. Can you photograph them? I already did. Sending them to your phone now. Carmen, you're taking a huge risk. I know. But you were kind to me when Mrs. Victoria treated me like I was invisible. You asked about my daughter's health, remembered her name. This is the least I can do. Thank you. One more thing, Carmen said. I overheard Mrs. Victoria on the phone. She was talking to someone about the search, and she said something strange. She said, "This time it has to look completely natural." What does that mean? I don't know, but it frightened me. The way she said it, like she'd done something like this before. Margaret's blood chilled. This time. As if there had been a previous time. Carmen, did Victoria have any other relatives? Anyone who died unexpectedly? Her grandmother, your mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Chin. She died about 4 years ago, right before I started working here. Mrs. Victoria inherited everything, this house, money, everything. How did Eleanor die? I don't know. Mrs. Victoria never talked about it. After hanging up, Margaret's mind raced. Her former mother-in-law, Eleanor Chun, had been vibrant and sharp at 82. They hadn't been close. Eleanor had never approved of Margaret's demanding career, but they'd maintained cordial relations. Eleanor had died suddenly of what was reported as a stroke. Margaret had been consumed with her own work at the time, hadn't questioned it. Now she wondered. She called Ruth back. I need you to look into another death. Eleanor Chun, my former mother-in-law. She died 4 years ago, supposedly of a stroke. Why? Because Victoria said something that suggests she might have done this before. Ruth was silent for a moment. I'll look into it. But Margaret, if Victoria has killed before, you're in immediate danger. She knows you've escaped. She knows you might have evidence. I understand the risk. Call me as soon as you find anything. The afternoon crawled by. Margaret reviewed the photographs Carmen had sent. Fake medical records documenting a progressive dementia that didn't exist. Fabricated lab results showing cognitive decline. Notes from Dr. Patterson describing symptoms Margaret had never exhibited. It was a comprehensive false medical history, carefully constructed to support a competency claim. At 6 p.m, Ruth called back. Margaret, I found something. About Eleanor? Yes. She died at Victoria's house. Victoria was her primary caregiver for the last 6 months of her life. Go on. The death certificate lists cause of death as ischemic stroke. But I spoke with a contact at the medical examiner's office. There was some concern at the time about the circumstances. What kind of concern? Eleanor had been healthy, no history of cardiovascular disease. The sudden stroke seemed suspicious. But Victoria insisted there be no autopsy, claimed it was against her grandmother's wishes. Without family pushing for investigation, the case was closed. Was there an inheritance? Eleanor's entire estate. The house, investments, about $3 million. All to Victoria, since she'd been named sole beneficiary just 2 months before Eleanor's death, just like she tried to change my will. Exactly. And Margaret, here's what's really disturbing. The medications found in Eleanor's bathroom after her death. They're the same ones you've been describing. Lorazepam, haloperidol, medications that could cause sedation, confusion. In an elderly person, that combination could trigger a stroke. Victoria killed her grandmother. I can't prove it without an exhumation and full investigation, but the pattern is clear. She isolated Eleanor, drugged her, and either caused or hastened her death to inherit. Then spent the money and needed more. So she turned on me. Yes, but this time you figured it out before she could complete her plan. Ruth, we need to go to the police immediately. Agreed. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow morning with the prosecutor. Bring all your evidence. And Margaret, stay hidden tonight. If Victoria realizes you're building a case against her, there's no telling what she might do. After hanging up, Margaret sat in the dimming light of the cottage, processing the full horror of what she'd uncovered. Her daughter wasn't just desperate for money. She was a calculating killer who'd murdered once before and was willing to do it again. The night was long. Margaret dozed fitfully, startling at every sound. When her phone rang at 3 a.m, she answered immediately. Dr. Chun, it's Carmen. I'm so sorry to call so late, But I heard something you need to know. What is it? Mrs. Victoria and Mr. David don't think I can hear them, but their bedroom window was open. They were arguing about you, about the search. Mr. David said they should wait, let the police find you. But Mrs. Victoria said no. She said if you're found alive, you could ruin everything. She said she knows someone who can take care of the problem. Take care of the problem? What does that mean? I don't know, but she sounded determined. She said by this time tomorrow, one way or another, you won't be a threat anymore. Carmen, you need to leave that house. Tonight. Where can I go? I don't have anywhere. Give me your phone number. I'm going to have someone pick you up within the hour. You can stay here with me until this is resolved. After calling Patricia to arrange Carmen's pickup, Margaret called Ruth. We can't wait until tomorrow, she said. Victoria's making threats. She might have hired someone. I'm calling the prosecutor now, Ruth said. Emergency meeting at 6 a.m. And I'm sending police protection to your location immediately. Don't open the door for anyone except uniformed officers. The patrol car arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers positioned themselves outside the cottage, one at the front door, one at the back. Carmen arrived shortly after, trembling and frightened. Dr. Chun, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner about Mrs. Eleanor. You knew about Eleanor? Not everything, but I started working there right after she died. The house still had her things in it, her medications in the bathroom cabinet. I saw the same pills that Mrs. Victoria later gave to you. Morning came slowly. At 5:30, Patricia brought coffee and breakfast. At 5:45, Ruth arrived with a woman in a dark suit. Margaret, this is Assistant Prosecutor Catherine Walsh. She'll be handling your case. Dr. Chun, Ms. Kowalski has briefed me on your situation. I'd like to take a preliminary statement now, then we'll go to my office for a formal interview. But first, I need to tell you something. We've obtained warrants for Victoria and David's arrest. Officers are executing those warrants right now. Margaret's hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. They're being arrested? Yes, for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder in your case. We're also opening an investigation into Eleanor Chen's death. If we find sufficient evidence, Victoria will face murder charges for that as well. What happens now? Now you give us your statement, provide all your evidence, and we build the strongest possible case. Dr. Chun, I want you to know that what your daughter did to you, what she may have done to your mother-in-law, it's unconscionable. We're going to make sure she faces justice. The formal statement took hours. Margaret detailed everything, the systematic drugging, the fabricated medical records, the plot to steal her settlement money, her suspicions about Eleanor's death, the threats Victoria had made. Elena arrived mid-morning with her complete toxicology report, confirming dangerous levels of multiple medications in Margaret's system over months. Ruth provided the financial records showing Victoria's embezzlement and desperate need for money. Carmen gave a statement about witnessing the drugging and finding the fake medical records. At noon, Catherine received a phone call. She listened, made notes, then turned to Margaret. Victoria and David have been taken into custody. They're being held without bail given the flight risk and severity of the charges. Would you like to see her? To speak with her? Margaret considered the question. Part of her wanted to confront Victoria, to demand an answer to the question that still haunted her. Why? How had her daughter become capable of such calculated cruelty? But another part of her, the part that had survived by maintaining clinical detachment throughout her career, knew that no answer would be satisfying. Some people did monstrous things for reasons that would never make sense. I don't think so, Margaret said finally. I don't think there's anything she could say that would help me understand. Catherine nodded. That's your choice, of course. But Dr. Chun, there's something else. Eleanor Chen's body is being exhumed tomorrow. We'll conduct a full autopsy and toxicology screen. If we find evidence of poisoning or drug-facilitated death, Victoria will face additional murder charges. How long will that take? Several weeks for complete results. In the meantime, Victoria and David will remain in custody. The trial will likely take months to prepare. Margaret felt exhausted suddenly, drained by the emotional weight of the day. What do I do now? Where do I go? You're free to return home, Catherine said. To Victoria's house? That house was never my home. Besides, the house legally belongs to Victoria. I signed it over to her when I moved in. Actually, that's something we need to discuss, Catherine said. Given that the deed transfer occurred during the period when you were being drugged, we may be able to challenge its validity. You weren't in a state to make informed legal decisions. For now, Patricia has agreed to let you stay in her guest cottage as long as you need. Ruth added, and we'll work on securing your financial assets, making sure Victoria can't access anything while the case proceeds. Thank you, Margaret said quietly. All of you. Over the following weeks, Margaret slowly rebuilt her strength. The fog cleared completely from her mind as the medications worked their way out of her system. Her hands stopped trembling. Her memory sharpened. She was sleeping through the night for the first time in months. The toxicology results on Eleanor Chen's exhumed body came back 6 weeks later. Catastrophic levels of benzodiazepines and antipsychotics in her tissue samples. The cause of death was officially changed from natural stroke to drug-induced cardiac arrest. Manner of death, homicide. Victoria was charged with first-degree murder in Eleanor's death. The trial began 4 months after Margaret's escape. She sat in the courtroom every day, watching as prosecutors methodically built their case. Carmen testified about witnessing the drugging. Elena presented her toxicology findings. Ruth detailed the financial motives. Dr. Patterson, granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, admitted to falsifying medical records at Victoria's request. He'd been having an affair with Victoria for 2 years. She'd used the relationship to manipulate him into participating in the scheme. David testified against Victoria, accepting a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. He detailed how Victoria had orchestrated everything, how she drugged her grandmother Eleanor first, perfected her method, then turned the same tactics on Margaret. He claimed he'd been coerced, blackmailed with evidence of his embezzlement. Margaret didn't believe him. She'd heard his voice through the vent, calculating and cold. But his testimony was damning nonetheless. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Victoria Chen, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder in Eleanor Chen's death. Attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy in Margaret Chen's case. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led Victoria away in handcuffs, she turned to look at Margaret one final time. Her expression held no remorse, no shame, only cold fury that her plan had failed. Margaret met her daughter's gaze steadily, feeling nothing but profound sadness for what Victoria had become. David received 15 years for his role in Margaret's abuse and for his complicity in covering up Eleanor's murder. Dr. Patterson lost his medical license and received 5 years for falsifying records and elder abuse. A year after the trial, Margaret stood in the small garden behind Patricia's cottage, which she'd purchased from Patricia 6 months earlier. At 70, she moved more carefully than she once had, but her mind was sharp, her hands steady. The cottage suited her. Modest but comfortable, with a garden she tended herself and enough space for the life she was rebuilding. She'd donated half of her settlement money to elder abuse prevention organizations and to establishing a foundation in Eleanor's name that funded free legal services for seniors. The rest she'd invested carefully, ensuring she'd never be financially dependent on anyone again. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Coffee at 3? I'm bringing my granddaughter. She wants to meet you. Margaret smiled, typing a reply to Ruth. I'll make cookies. Ruth had become a close friend during the long months of investigation and trial. They met regularly now, sometimes to discuss Ruth's ongoing work with elder abuse cases, often simply to talk, to share the comfortable companionship of 2 women who'd survived their own battles. The doorbell rang precisely at 3. Ruth stood on the doorstep with a young woman in her 20s, bright-eyed and curious. Dr. Chun, this is my granddaughter, Lisa. She's starting medical school next month. Lisa wants to specialize in geriatrics eventually, Ruth explained as they settled on the porch with coffee and cookies. I told her about your career, about what you survived, and she wanted to meet you. I'm honored, Margaret said. What made you choose geriatrics? My grandmother, Lisa said, gesturing to Ruth. Watching her work with elder abuse cases, seeing how vulnerable seniors can be, how they're often invisible in our healthcare system. I want to change that. You will, Margaret said with certainty. If you have even half your grandmother's dedication and courage, you'll make a real difference. They talked for hours about medicine, about Margaret's career, about the challenges ahead for young doctors. As the afternoon sun lengthened into evening shadows, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the naive hope of her younger self, who'd believed that love and good intentions were enough, but a harder, wiser hope. The knowledge that even after betrayal, after darkness, after the worst that people could do to each other, there was still goodness in the world. Still people like Ruth who fought for justice. Still young people like Lisa who wanted to make things better. Still the possibility of rebuilding a life from fragments. After Ruth and Lisa left, Margaret walked through her small garden, checking the growth of her tomato plants, deadheading the roses she'd planted in spring. As she worked, she thought about Eleanor, about how her former mother-in-law had died alone and confused, drugged into submission by a granddaughter she'd trusted, about how Margaret herself had come within weeks of the same fate. But she'd survived. She'd fought back. She'd found the strength to escape and the courage to expose the truth, no matter how painful. And now she was free, truly free, in a way she hadn't been even before Victoria's betrayal. Free of the obligation to maintain relationships that were toxic. Free of the guilt that had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Free to build a life on her own terms. As twilight fell, Margaret sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies begin their evening dance. Her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. Dr. Chun? A woman's voice, professional but warm. My name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm a producer for a documentary series about elder abuse and medical fraud. I was wondering if you'd be willing to tell your story. Margaret hesitated. The trial had been public, her story already spread across news outlets. But this would be different. This would be her voice, her perspective, her truth. What would the documentary involve? Jennifer explained. Interviews with Margaret, with the prosecutors and investigators, with elder abuse prevention experts. The goal was to educate families about warning signs, to help seniors protect themselves, to expose the vulnerabilities in the system that allowed cases like Margaret's to occur. I'll do it, Margaret said, but on one condition. What's that? We also tell Eleanor Chen's story. She was Victoria's first victim. She deserves to be remembered. Absolutely, Jennifer agreed. Her story is part of yours. Over the following months, Margaret gave extensive interviews for the documentary. She spoke candidly about her experience, about the shame of being victimized by her own daughter, about the fog of medication that had stolen months of her life, about the fear and determination that had driven her escape. The documentary, titled Silent Betrayal, aired 9 months later. It became one of the most watched programs in the series, sparking conversations about elder abuse across the country. Legislators cited it while introducing new protections for seniors. Medical boards implemented stricter oversight of doctors who prescribed powerful medications to elderly patients. And most importantly, families started asking questions, started paying attention to elderly relatives who seemed suddenly confused or diminished. Margaret received hundreds of letters and emails from people who'd seen the documentary. Some were from seniors who'd recognized their own situations and sought help. Others were from adult children who'd discovered that a sibling or parent was exploiting their elderly relative. Many were simply expressions of gratitude that someone had spoken openly about a problem too often hidden behind closed doors. On the second anniversary of her escape from Victoria's house, Margaret hosted a small gathering at her cottage. Ruth and Lisa were there, along with Carmen, who'd found a new job with a family who treated her with respect and paid her fairly. Elena attended with Patricia. Catherine, the prosecutor, stopped by with news that she'd been promoted to head the Elder Abuse Division. As Margaret looked around her garden at the friends who'd helped save her life, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not gratitude for what had happened, the betrayal and drugging and near-death experience, but gratitude that she'd found the strength to survive it, that she'd discovered who her real allies were. that she'd lived long enough to help others avoid the same fate. The evening was warm, the conversation easy. As the sun set and candles flickered on the patio table, Lisa asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. Do you ever think about Victoria? About whether you'll see her again? Margaret considered the question carefully. I think about her, she said finally. I think about the little girl she was, before whatever darkness took hold. I think about the moments when I believed she loved me. But those memories belong to someone who doesn't exist anymore, if she ever really did. The woman in prison now, the woman who systematically poisoned 2 people she should have protected, I have nothing to say to her. And forgiveness? Ruth asked gently. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Margaret shook her head slowly. Forgiveness implies some kind of reconciliation, some path forward together. There is no path forward with Victoria. What she did was unforgivable, not just to me, but to Eleanor, to everyone whose trust she violated. But I've found something more valuable than forgiveness. What's that? Lisa asked. Peace. I've let go of the anger that would have consumed me if I'd held on to it. I've stopped asking why she did it, because there's no answer that would satisfy me. I've accepted that some people are capable of terrible things, and that being related to them doesn't make me responsible for their choices. That's wisdom, Catherine said, and it's more than Victoria deserves. Perhaps Margaret agreed, but it's what I deserve. The freedom to live without being defined by what she did to me. As the gathering wound down and her friends departed with hugs and promises to meet again soon, Margaret stood alone in her garden under a sky full of stars. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, confused and frightened, slowly being poisoned in a beautiful house that had become her prison. That woman was gone now, dissolved like the medications that had clouded her mind. In her place stood someone harder, wiser, but also more compassionate. Someone who understood vulnerability from the inside, who knew what it meant to be powerless and fight your way back to strength. Someone who would spend the rest of her life making sure that others didn't have to face the same darkness alone. Margaret walked slowly back to her cottage, her home, her sanctuary. Inside, on her desk, lay a stack of letters from seniors who'd reached out after watching the documentary. Tomorrow she'd begin answering them, offering advice, providing resources, connecting them with people who could help. It was purposeful work, meaningful work, the kind of work that gave her day's structure and her life meaning. As she prepared for bed, Margaret looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back was older, lined with experiences both terrible and transformative. But the eyes were clear, alert, fully present. This was who she was now. A survivor, an advocate, a woman who'd stared into the darkness and found her way back to the light. She thought about Victoria one last time before sleep. Wondered if her daughter ever felt remorse in her cell. Wondered if she understood the magnitude of what she'd destroyed, not just lives, but the fundamental trust between parent and child, between family members who should have protected each other. Then Margaret let those thoughts go, released them into the night. Victoria was the past. Tomorrow and all the days after belonged to the future, to the work she would do, to the people she would help, to the life she'd fought so hard to reclaim. Margaret turned off the light and settled into bed, surrounded by the peaceful silence of her cottage. For the first time in years, she felt completely safe, completely herself, completely free. And as sleep claimed her, her last thought was simple and profound. She had survived. She had won. And she would never be anyone's victim again. The darkness that had nearly consumed her had instead forged her into something stronger, something unbreakable. And that, she thought as consciousness faded, was the greatest victory of all.